The wind moved slow that morning, like it was unsure if it should stay. Dust curled up from the road and floated in the kind of silence only found in tired towns. Wooden signs creaked overhead. A church bell rang once in the distance, not for worship, but for sale. The town of Kettlebone had gathered, men with tobacco-stained beards, women with their arms crossed like shields, children too thin to laugh. They stood around the platform where the sheriff had nailed down a few wide planks, now blackened from the heat of too many summers and too much shame. No one cheered. No one clapped. The kind of auction that took place here wasn't one made for celebration. She stood barefoot. The Chinese girl, the woman was more honest, was 25, maybe younger if not for the way her eyes held still. Not frightened. Not bold either. Just tired. Her wrists were bound in twine, but she didn't struggle. Her black hair hung over her shoulders, long and dull like river water that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Her dress, faded blue, was clean but frayed. Someone had cared for it once. That someone was gone now. She had no name anyone bothered to use. Startin' at 5, the auctioneer grunted, voice graveled from whiskey and disregard. No less. Ain't worth the feed below that. No one moved. The wind kicked up again, soft and biting. The girl blinked once, slow. A horse neighed in the distance. A crow circled above the church steeple like it, too, was waiting. Then he stepped forward. No one saw him arrive. He didn't ride into town like the others. He simply stood at the back until his silence wore loud enough to be noticed. The man wore a coat too thick for the season and boots caked in red clay from out east. His beard was short, peppered with gray. His eyes, not cruel, not kind, just deeply distant, like he hadn't looked at anything and meant it in a long time. Someone whispered his name, or what passed for it. Folks called him the Mute of Briar Creek. He hadn't spoken in over 7 years. Some said he'd gone mad when his wife died. Others said he never had a wife at all. He raised his hand. The crowd stirred. $5, the auctioneer said, almost confused. That's the opening bid. You buyin' or jokin', stranger? The man said nothing. He walked forward, pulled a pouch from his coat, and placed 5 silver coins on the crate beside the platform. Then he looked at the girl. Not her dress. Not the rope. Her. She met his gaze. Still no fear. Sold, the auctioneer muttered, then turned away like it stung his mouth. The man untied the rope from her wrists himself. Careful. Slow. Like he was afraid the wind might tear her away if he moved too quick. He didn't touch her skin. He simply let the rope fall, then turned and began walking. She followed. They left behind a silence thicker than before. A dog barked in the distance. No one knew what had just happened, but everyone felt it. They walked for near an hour. Not fast, not slow. The trail was dry, lined with scrub and cottonwoods too tired to bloom. She didn't ask where they were going. He didn't say. At one point, he handed her a small tin flask. She drank, nodded, gave it back. The cabin appeared like a memory someone forgot they still had, gray wood, soft corners, a porch with one chair missing a leg. A small barn sagged to the left, its door open like a yawn. Chickens roamed, half wild and indifferent. He gestured toward the house. She stepped inside first. The air smelled of cedar smoke and loneliness. One cot. One chair. One table with a chipped bowl and a candle burned halfway down. No pictures. No mirror. He walked past her, opened the back room. It was empty but swept. A folded blanket on the floor, a small shelf, a bowl of water already waiting. As if he'd known she was coming. Or hoped. She touched the windowsill. Dust came away on her fingers. She began to clean without a word. He stepped outside, sat on the porch, and lit a pipe. The smoke curled around him like a ghost that couldn't decide if it missed him or hated him. That night, she cooked rice from a tin in his cupboard, added herbs from her own pocket. They ate in silence. Not cold. Just cautious. He looked at her once, and she noticed, but didn't look back. Later, she sat near the fire. He was across the room, staring into a small box he kept in his lap. She could just make out the corner of a photograph. A woman, maybe. Someone not there. The wind shifted through the cracks in the wall. Neither of them moved. She hummed softly. A tune from far across the sea. It didn't belong here, and yet it filled the cabin like a forgotten lullaby. He closed his eyes. Not asleep, just somewhere else. The next morning, the rooster crowed too early. She was already up, sweeping the porch with a worn broom she found behind the barn. Her hair was braided now. Her dress still the same. But she stood straighter. He came outside with a cup of coffee and 2 pieces of bread. She nodded when he handed her one. Then came the sound. A low rumble. Hoofbeats. Wheels. Shouting. The town had come. He stepped forward, down the 2 porch steps, still holding the cup in his hand. Men were gathering in front of the gate. Women behind them. One man held a torch, though it was morning. Another had a rifle. She stood behind him, calm. One woman in the crowd stepped forward. Her voice cracked as she pointed. "You think we don't know who she is?" Murmurs rose. "She's the one from Brimwell. That fire last winter. The house burned with him inside." "She was there," another shouted. "She was his. She's cursed. She's dangerous. She'll bring ruin to us all." The man said nothing. He simply stood there, cup in hand, watching dust swirl around the townspeople's boots. The sheriff rode up slowly. His face was carved with weariness. He didn't raise a weapon. He looked at the girl, then the man, then back at the crowd. "Y'all go home," the sheriff muttered. "Ain't no proof of nothing here." But no one moved. A boy threw a stone. It bounced off the step. She didn't flinch. "We'll be back," someone hissed. "That witch don't belong here." The man turned, walked back up the steps, and set the cup down on the porch rail. She watched the mob retreat like a tide unwilling to give up the shore. It didn't feel like victory. Just the first breath before a storm. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. She went to the window and pulled the curtain back. He stood still, facing the horizon. Neither said a word. But something had changed. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt full, of things that hadn't been spoken yet, of things too heavy for one morning to hold. Outside, the dust rose again. And somewhere behind the mountains, thunder growled, not loud, but certain. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows over the cottonwoods that leaned like tired sentinels around the cabin. Inside, silence sat between them like a guest neither had invited but both knew wouldn't leave soon. She scrubbed the wooden floor with a piece of rough cloth dipped in water scented faintly with mint. He sat by the window, whittling a piece of soft pine down to a vague shape that might one day become something. The crowd had gone, but the echo of their words had not. The house still trembled with the aftershock of accusation. "Cursed," they said. "Dangerous." He hadn't answered them, hadn't needed to. But now that the sun was slipping past the hills, the question hovered between them like mist: why had he stayed silent? She rose from the floor and wrung the cloth outside, her eyes drawn to the dry trail leading toward town. No fresh tracks, no torches, just memory. The sheriff hadn't returned. That could be good or bad. She didn't know how to read these people yet. Not their silences, not their threats. When she stepped back inside, he was no longer at the window. She heard him in the back room, pulling something heavy. A wooden trunk creaked open. She lingered near the doorway. He pulled out a small pouch and set it on the table, along with a square envelope sealed in cracked wax. He motioned for her to sit. She did, slowly. He didn't speak, but pushed the envelope toward her. She opened it carefully, unsure if the contents were meant for her. Inside was a worn letter written in delicate script. It was a testimonial, dated 3 months ago, from a priest in a town she recognized. He'd written about a man who died in a fire, his own doing. The priest had seen the girl run out, barefoot and bloodied, carrying only a single photograph. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, not in fear, but something closer to gratitude. He watched her without blinking. She traced the signature with her fingertip. "You believe this?" He nodded once. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing dust against the windows. That night, she told him more. Not all at once. Just in fragments, like broken dishes carefully glued together with silence between the cracks. The first man who bought her spoke no Mandarin, and never tried to learn. He called her girl and fed her like livestock. The second one fancied himself tender. He gave her a name he liked, wrapped her in dresses too tight, taught her to smile for guests. The third was cruel only when no one was watching. The last, he drank. And one night, he tried to push her into the stove. She fled barefoot into snow, and the flames took him. That part wasn't her doing. The priest had seen her run. "I thought, if I ran far enough," she whispered, "maybe I'd stop smelling like smoke." He didn't answer with words. But his eyes were glassy with something deep, not pity. Something more bruised. Like he, too, had once run, and knew it never truly worked. In the following days, the rhythm of life shifted. She no longer waited for him to eat first. They sat together now. He fixed the porch rail, and she tended a patch of earth behind the house. Her herbs grew quick in the dry soil, as though they'd been waiting for a place to belong. A boy came one morning, not more than 10, freckled and shoeless. He had a cloth bundle tied at the end of a stick, bread, and a folded piece of paper with a drawing of a red sun. He handed it to her and ran before she could speak. Inside the cloth was cornbread and a lopsided apple. That afternoon, the man found a note tacked to the barn door. "You have until Friday. Then we come." No signature. Just a jagged drawing of fire. He burned the note in the stove. She watched the flames eat the paper, her eyes unblinking. He didn't try to hide it. There was no use pretending peace would hold. That night, she asked, "Why did you stop speaking?" The question hovered between them for so long, she thought he might not answer. He finally did. "My son," he said, voice like cracked stone. "He drowned." She waited. He swallowed hard, then looked at his hands. He was 10. "My wife said it was my fault. I was supposed to watch him. I didn't." He fell in the creek. It was slow, the current. Slow and quiet. Like a secret being kept. She felt the room pulling around them, as though the cabin itself ached. "I buried him," he said. "Then I buried my voice." She wanted to reach across the table and take his hand. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she said gently, "I'm sorry your boy never had time to grow into his shadow." He looked at her then, eyes wide, surprised by the poetry. They sat long into the night. No more words. Just the fire, and a shared understanding. Both had run, both had burned, both had been broken open and left to heal in silence. Morning came sharp and blue. The sheriff arrived just past dawn, not on horseback, but walking. His coat was unbuttoned and his face drawn tight. He didn't cross the fence. Just stood near the edge. "They mean it," he said. "Some of 'em. Not all. But enough." The man nodded. "We know." The sheriff sighed. "I don't got power to stop 'em if they come in numbers. You best leave." The girl stepped forward. "I'm not running anymore." He blinked. She said it quiet, but firm. The sheriff tipped his hat, hesitated, then turned and walked away. Later, the widow arrived, thin, back curved like a bow, eyes sharp as ever. She brought a bundle of dried lavender and 2 small knives. "They come," she said, "you don't fight stupid. You fight smart." She left without another word. Inside the cabin, the man reinforced the door. She layered the windows with flour sacks and lined the base with water buckets. The boy came again that night, left a lantern and a red scarf. They sat in silence after sundown. The air had changed, still, but ready. He poured 2 mugs of tea and handed her one. "You don't owe me this," she said. "I know. Then why help me?" He stirred his tea slowly. "Because I see you." She looked at him for a long time. "You see a stranger." "No," he said softly. "I see someone brave enough to come through fire and still walk without fear. That's not a stranger. That's a kindred." She swallowed. The fire popped, sending a spark toward the hearth. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "they'll come." He didn't flinch. "Then let them." Outside, the wind was quiet now. Too quiet. And somewhere, under the cottonwoods, shadows began to gather. The morning rose slowly, a veil of gold over the hills, brushing against the roof of the old cabin like a blessing or a warning. Dew clung to the grass that had sprung up around the porch, green as defiance. The world outside had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. She woke before him, stirred by a dream she couldn't hold on to. In it, there had been water. A still pond. A reflection of herself, then ripples, then fire. Always fire. Inside, the embers still breathed in the stove. She crouched before them, adding kindling with gentle fingers. She'd come to understand fire. It wasn't cruel by nature. Only when starved or unleashed. He came in from outside, face streaked with dirt, having checked the traps and fences before dawn. They nodded to each other like the day before hadn't threatened anything at all. But something in their movements, quieter, heavier, betrayed that they both knew. Today mattered. It might be the last one untouched. She poured water into a kettle, set it on the heat, and looked toward the small mirror he'd hung by the door. In it, she caught the outline of her own face, worn, still, but no longer unreadable. She could see her will in it now. Her own name, even if no one else spoke it. They sat across from one another with mugs in hand, not tea this time, but something stronger, bitter bark boiled into a tonic. He said it would brace the nerves. She believed him. After a few sips, she set hers down and spoke. "In my village, there was a story," she said. "Of a phoenix who did not burn from fire, but from sorrow. And when it rose again, it could never return to the same sky. That was the curse." He listened with both ears and all the heart he had left. She could feel it. "I didn't know then," she went on, "how sorrow burns. It's quiet. It waits. It doesn't destroy all at once, it's a slow unraveling." He nodded. "I think I was born in the ashes." There was a silence between them, but this time it didn't ache. It settled like understanding. The kind that didn't need fixing. He rose, walked to the chest by the hearth, and pulled out an oilskin pouch. Inside it, folded carefully, was a letter. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the ink, trembling slightly as the meaning unfolded. It was a witness statement, signed and sealed by the priest from the town where the fire had taken the man she'd escaped. The document told the truth, that she had fled, not fought. That the man had been drunk, furious, and had struck her with a poker. That the priest had seen her stumble out before the house lit up like dry grass in August. She looked up at him, the letter in her lap. "I thought no one believed me," she whispered. "I didn't believe anyone else," he replied. "But I saw you. And something in me knew." Her throat tightened, not from sorrow now, but something rarer. A kind of safety she hadn't expected to find in this lifetime. They spent the day preparing, not with panic, but with purpose. He reinforced the hinges on the doors. She gathered salt and water and placed them at each window, old protection passed down through her mother's mouth. He taught her how to hold the smaller of the two rifles, not to kill, he said, only to warn. She listened, though her hands shook when she wrapped around the grip. By noon, the sky had clouded over. Not dark yet, but bruised, as though the heavens, too, were uneasy. The boy came again, this time running. He was panting, eyes wide, a scrape on his cheek. "They're coming," he gasped. "They're comin', from town square. 4 wagons. Fire barrels. They said." She knelt to hold his face in both hands. "You did right coming here. You go now. Go to the widow's house. Stay there." He nodded, frightened, then ran, his small frame swallowed by the brush. They waited together in silence, the stillness stretching like a taut string. Outside, even the chickens had gone quiet. She stood by the window. He stood by the door. "I won't let them take you," he said quietly. "They won't," she replied, equally quiet. And then, over the ridge, smoke. Not much at first, just the gray coil of wagon fire drifting into the sky like a question. But it grew thicker as the procession came into view. Men with guns. Women with torches. The sheriff wasn't among them. But the preacher was. So was the butcher. And the blacksmith's son. All familiar faces. All hollow now with fear dressed up as righteousness. She touched the edge of the table to steady herself. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They watched the mob approach, saw the dust rise beneath their boots, felt the cabin seem to shrink in the weight of the moment. When the first wagon stopped at the fence, the preacher stepped forward. "We're here for her," he called out. "She's not welcome. You had your chance to hand her over." No answer came. The man opened the door slowly and stepped out onto the porch, rifle held down but ready. The girl stood behind him in the doorway, back straight, the letter clutched in her hand. "She's not going anywhere," he said, voice deep and calm. Murmurs rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. The preacher raised his hand. "She's a murderer. This town will not harbor the devil." The man held up the letter. "She's not the devil. She's the survivor. You want proof? This here's from the priest at Brimwell. He saw the whole thing. Saw her run, saw the fire take the man who beat her." The preacher faltered, but the others did not. "She's a curse," someone shouted. "We'll burn her out." The girl stepped forward then, past him, past the porch rail. "You call me curse," she said clearly. "But it's your fear that burns, not me. I have done nothing but survive. And survive again. And again." The preacher raised his hand again. "Light it." But no one moved. Something had shifted. A breeze, maybe. Or maybe the sight of her, barefoot still, but tall in her stillness, wrapped not in fear but resolve, broke whatever lie they'd been feeding themselves. The blacksmith's son lowered his torch. Then another. And another. The preacher's hand trembled. The man stepped down and stood beside her. "You want to burn something," he said, "you'll have to burn us both." And in the long pause that followed, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. Then the widow's voice, sharp and high, cut through the hush like a blade. "You all ought to be ashamed." She came walking down the road, cane in one hand, rifle in the other. "You bring fire to a girl who's already lost everything. What kind of cowards are you?" Some in the crowd turned. And the moment passed. The preacher dropped his hand. The fire barrels remained unlit. One by one, they began to walk away. Some in shame, some still stiff with stubborn hate. But they left. The girl let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The man stood beside her, his hand near but not touching hers. When the last wagon creaked back down the hill, he turned to her. "We should rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we plant." She nodded. And as they stepped back inside, the cabin didn't feel like a shelter anymore. It felt like a home. The air after retreat always carries a strange weight, too still, too quiet, as though even the earth is holding its breath, uncertain if peace is truth or simply delay. She stood by the window long after the last of them disappeared beyond the ridge, arms folded, eyes tracing the empty road. He remained by the door, listening, as if the wind might still whisper intentions from those who'd left. But nothing came. No return. No last flare of rage. Just silence. That night, they didn't speak much. He lit the lantern, she lit the stove. Their movements had become something like prayer, soft, careful, grounded in gratitude not yet fully formed. She made soup from bones and wild onions. He chopped wood without rush. The fear had lifted, yes, but the heaviness hadn't. Not yet. Over the next few days, the sky wept a little, almost as if to cleanse the land. Rain pooled in the tracks left by the wagons, and the earth drank slow and deep. Her herbs bloomed wider. The garden bed he dug by the barn grew smooth and dark, waiting for seed. One morning, she stepped out carrying a woven pouch filled with kernels, and together they knelt. She pressed each seed into the soil with her fingertips like laying down old pain. He covered them gently, hands steady and practiced. Neither spoke of what they were really planting: hope, belonging, a future with soft edges, but it was there, growing in silence. In town, they said little. Most avoided the topic, as if ashamed of the fever that had overtaken them. The preacher did not return. Some claimed he'd left in the night. Others said he merely found no audience for fire once people had seen a woman stand without trembling. The boy came again. This time he brought a book, dog-eared, with missing pages. He said it had stories in it about animals that could speak. She thanked him, and he sat on the porch steps for a while, humming. The widow visited too, once, bringing a small jar of honey and news that the sheriff was taking a trip east. She didn't say why, but her eyes told them it was to make things right. Time thickened in its own way. The cabin grew warmer, not just from fire, but from laughter, slow and rare as it was. She began painting the window shutters in deep green. He started carving again, small figures this time, birds, mostly. Things that fly. But even with peace, there were questions. Things unspoken. Threads hanging in the still air. One afternoon, as they shelled beans on the porch, she asked quietly, "What would you have done, if they hadn't stopped?" He didn't look at her right away. His hands kept moving, steady. "I would have stood," he said. "For me?" "For the truth," he answered. "Which is the same thing." She nodded, not needing more. Later, he brought her the carving he'd been working on, a phoenix, rising from flame. Its wings were rough, unfinished, but beautiful. She held it in both hands and smiled. That night, a letter came. The sheriff had sent it ahead from the rail town. It was official, a clearing of charges. Her name, though still not known to most, was no longer a stain. She read it by lanternlight, lips parting slightly as if to let out a breath she'd held for years. Then, gently, she laid it down, stood, and went to the door. He followed, wordless. Outside, the stars had spilled across the sky like spilt sugar. The moon hung low, full and bright. The cottonwoods whispered. She took his hand. For the first time, she reached for him. He didn't flinch. They stood that way for a while, fingers twined, the night pressing close around them not as threat, but comfort. Weeks passed. Seasons edged forward. The garden grew. One morning, she woke to find a fresh shirt laid at the foot of her bed, a gift, neatly folded. No note. Just care. She wore it that day while baking bread. He said nothing, but his smile lingered long into the evening. Another afternoon, she caught him standing at the fence, watching the town in the far distance, far-off smoke curling upward. "You miss it?" she asked. "No," he said. "Only sometimes the silence echoes louder than noise." She nodded, understanding. "You ever want to leave here?" he asked then, eyes still on the horizon. She looked around, the porch, the garden, the sky. Not anymore. And they didn't. Instead, they grew into the land like trees that had been waiting to root. Visitors came rarely, but when they did, they left different, calmer, quieter, as though some hush from the cabin soaked into them. She began to write letters, stories, really. Of women who endured, of men who listened, of fire that didn't consume but shaped. She never signed them. Just sealed them and sent them with the widow to place where they might be found. One letter found its way into a newspaper in a bigger town. Another ended up in the hands of a schoolteacher who read it aloud to her class. People started to talk, not of fear, but of grace. One evening, years later, the boy, now older, voice deeper, returned with his fiancée. He asked if they'd witness his vows. They did, under the cottonwoods. After the ceremony, he said to her, "You changed this place." She smiled. "No. I just stayed." That night, as the wind moved softly through the trees and the lantern cast a warm glow inside, he turned to her by the fire. "You still think sorrow burns?" She thought for a moment. "No," she said. "But it leaves a scar. And sometimes, a scar glows." He took her hand. Outside, a fox crossed the clearing without fear. And in the stillness, the cabin breathed. Some say he bought her for $5. But those who knew, who truly knew, understood what was bought that day was neither silence nor submission. It was a chance. A truth. A stand. And a home built not from wood or stone, but from something stronger. A heart that refused to burn alone.